Have some things coming up this week. Next Sunday is our trustee meeting. Also this Thursday night, in addition to the ladies' Secret Sister Reveal at 6 o'clock, the advisory board is meeting at 8 o'clock on Thursday night. So that's a very important meeting. So if you're part of the advisory board, please take note of that. And okay, I think I'll close in prayer and we'll go. No, that's right. No, I wanted to mention all those things because they're all important, and that information, a lot of it's in your bulletin. So please feel free to check that out if you would. Okay. We've been looking at this summer, and we'll continue for about another month, the I am sayings of Jesus in the Gospel of John. As we said, these are unique to the Gospel of John. They're not found anywhere else in the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We call those the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, synoptic, synoptic, which comes from a couple of Greek words that means to see together. Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke, while they are definitely different from each other, they have a lot more in common with each other than they do with the Gospel of John. 92% of what's in the Gospel of John is not found in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. And the I am sayings are a classic example of that. None of the 8 I am sayings of Jesus in the Gospel of John are found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's as though John most likely had read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but having been a disciple of Jesus, put together, or at least led to the putting together of a gospel that gave a whole different side of Jesus and who he is and aspects of his person that we would not have known otherwise. So what we're looking at today is Jesus' claim, rather strong and powerful claim. I am the resurrection and the life. Now, there were a lot of things he could have said. He could have said, I bring the resurrection and the life. I give the resurrection and the life. I point to the resurrection. I can show you how to experience the resurrection and the life. He could have said all those things. We didn't say any of them. He said, I am the resurrection and the life. Now, how does one person, i.e. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, God himself in human flesh, how does he personify resurrection? Resurrection is what happens to people when they are raised from the dead, but not just raised from the dead, but raised from the dead in a way that they would die no more. Lazarus was not resurrected. He was raised from the dead. That's what's kind of important and almost ironic to note about this story. Lazarus did die again. I've been to Jerusalem. I've been around the area of Bethany, and I have looked for Lazarus, and I didn't see him. Okay? Somehow I think if there had been a 2,000-year-old man there, I would have recognized that as such. No, he died again. So Jesus, that's not to diminish or demean Jesus' miracle. It's just that the miracle of resurrection, so far, there has only been one person who has been resurrected, and that is Jesus himself. Many other people in the Bible came back to life again, but they ultimately died. So Jesus is not just saying, I can show you the resurrection and life, I can tell you how to get it. He's saying, I am the resurrection and the life. To know me is to know the resurrection. Now, the section I want to look at this morning is actually in the middle of this story. It's John chapter 11, verses 17 to 27. And it says this. It says, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, it's likely, it's almost certain that Lazarus would have been buried almost immediately upon death, probably within 24 hours. This was not an uncommon thing in first century Jewish tradition. And if you read this carefully, there is one word in that first sentence that jumps out to you, and that is the word for. Right? Jesus promises after 3 days and 3 nights, right, that he will rise from the dead. Right? 4 days, and there's a purpose for that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Bethany was less than 2 miles distance from Jerusalem, and it's very close. You can walk there in a short time. Okay? Many Jews had come to Martha and Mary, to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Hint, hint. Okay? and kind of read those words in there. They're not there, but that's really what she's doing. Okay? Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Jesus is going to say something here on a sort of a spiritual level, if you will, but it's going to be heard on more of a physical level, even in this instance. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. All right, so Martha is thinking, and drop a big word on you right here, okay? It's all right. If you want to talk about it afterwards. Martha is thinking eschatologically. Okay, everybody repeat that after me. Martha is thinking eschatologically. Now, what does that even mean? It means she's thinking about the end times. Okay? She's thinking about the end of the world, as we sometimes call it, or when Christ returns, when Jesus returns, when Messiah returns, and establishes his kingdom, all the sin, all the destruction is destroyed, and God's righteous kingdom is set up upon the earth. That's what we call eschatology, among other things. Okay? So she's saying, I know it's going to happen way, way off in the future. I know that what she's saying is, I know that ultimately Lazarus is going to be okay. But I miss him now. I wish that he were here. And in fact, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. One of the few people I know of in the Bible, Mary does the same thing, who actually tried to send Jesus on a guilt trip. You know? My mom used to say stuff like that to me. Well, if you'd have done this, you know. Sorry, Mom, it's not going to work, you know. Well, Jesus, if you'd have been here, you know. Jesus then says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The resurrection is not simply exclusively some end-time event that is way off in the future. But the resurrection is here and now in the person of Jesus. He does not bring about the resurrection. He is the resurrection. It's not that, well, the resurrection happens through him. He is the one who brings it about. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. Now, chances are you might know some non-Christian friends or people who don't understand the Bible. That doesn't make any sense to them at all. Okay? The one who believes in me will live even though they die. Well, I got a response to that. You say, that doesn't make sense. How can they live even if they die? That sounds like doublespeak or something, right? Well, I got one for you. A lot of people in this world will say, well, you know, death is just a part of life. Death, life, okay? Death is death, and life is life. How can death be a part of life? Now, if you assume some certain facts about life, and that is that it has a beginning point, an ending point, and that's pretty much it. As one great Reformed Jewish scholar said, he said, human life is one moment of brilliance, and on either side of it are two infinite nothings. Well, isn't that encouraging? That you are just a flash in the pan. You're here for a moment. So when someone says, well, death is just a part of life, that seems like a very contradictory statement to me. Life is life. Jesus says, the one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Now, what Jesus is saying here, I think, is there is physical death, which is temporary. And we would say, looking at all the Scripture, that's the effects of the fall. Right? That's what the fall does. As I tell my students, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, okay? I do not look like I am 60 years old. I really don't. I look like I've lived for 60 years under the effects of the fall. Okay? The fall, for 60 years, has beaten the stuffings out of me, just like it has every one of you. Now, some of you, it's only been beating the stuffings out of you for 18 years. So you don't look as bad. Because you're only in the first round of that fight, okay? I'm in they don't 15 rounds. They don't do 15 rounds anymore. They used to do 15 rounds. They only do 12 now because 15 rounds of boxing was just too violent, okay? It's all pretty violent. But I'm in the 11th, well, I don't know, 10th, 9th. I mean, none of us really knows. That knockout punch could be coming any time for all we know. But the fact is, 9, 10 rounds out of a 12-round fight, yeah. So that's really what is happening here. You know, when Adam was created and he was walking around, if he had gone downtown to, get a driver's license or something, they would have said, well, what's your age? And he'd said, about 12 minutes. And you'd say, what? When he was created with that appearance of age, right? Now, you and I, we are going to die because of the effects of the fall. That's not a part of life. That was not God's original intention. God's original intention was that we would be his image bearers who would bear that image and display that image throughout all of his creation. So whoever lives by believing in me will never die, ultimately. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she said. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. All right? Now, there's a lot that happens before, and there are some things that happen after, not the least of which is that Lazarus is, in fact, raised up from the dead. Jesus goes to the tomb and says, Lazarus, come forth, and he comes forth. He walks out of the tomb. They take off the grave clothes, and he resumes normal physical life for a period of time. We don't know. There's nothing in the Bible to tell us how much longer Lazarus lived, but we know that he did. Now, in the first 16 verses of this chapter, we have the backstory, the preliminary story. All right? Jesus hears about the death of Lazarus, that Lazarus is ill, and he stays right where he is. Okay? So it says in John chapter 11, verse 1, Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And again, I think trying to sort of encourage Jesus to come and do something about the situation. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. Well, it did, right? I mean, it did by how we would define death, but not by how Jesus defines death. So we got to listen to the terms that Jesus is using, understand how he is using them. Excuse me. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son might be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, Let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back. Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they will see this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. And I wonder if the disciples kind of scratched their head as to what exactly that meant. But again, those notions, those concepts of light and darkness. Okay? Jesus says to the disciples that Lazarus is asleep. Right? Now, they will say to him, well, if he's sleeping, that's good, because he's sick, right? So if he's sleeping, that'll enable him to get better. In medical terminology, all the extraneous functions of his body will shut down, so his body can focus its full energy on healing and getting well, so he can eventually get up and resume a normal life. Right? Jesus says finally to them, he said, no, he's dead. Right? It takes that sort of straightforward statement in that example. Note again how Jesus uses the term to speak of death, that is to fall asleep, but the disciples take the term in a physical sense, right? That Lazarus is asleep. That's what they think he means. But of course what he means is the fact that Lazarus has died. Now, as we said, this section, verse 17, begins by telling us that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Now, that's simply a way of saying that he is good and dead. There's no doubt about it, okay? There's no question about it. Now, you think about that. My sister was with my father the morning that he passed away. And it really isn't that easy to tell if someone has passed or if they're just kind of, what's happening? So she called hospice, and they came, and they did the stethoscope thing and everything else, and they said, yeah, he's gone. Now, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. This establishes beyond any doubt that he's asleep. There's a statement, Genesis Rabbah, which is a commentary on the law, okay? And then you have Bar Kappara. You see that name there. That's the son of Kappara, who was some famous rabbi. This is a quote that pertains to this. Here's what many of these groups of Jews believe. And this is not in the Bible, okay? This is what some of the Jews believed, okay? The whole strength of the mourning is not until the third day. In other words, you don't really start mourning until the third day because you really aren't sure until the third day that they're dead. This is why we often refer to a person's viewing as a wake. We literally wait there, or at least they used to, in case the person actually really is alive and they wake up. Right? The whole strength of the mourning is not till the third day. For 3 days long, the soul returns to the grave. This is interesting. This is not in the Bible, okay? This is what these people believe. They believe that for 3 days long, the soul returns to the grave thinking it's going to return into the body. When, however, it sees the color of the face of the body has changed, then it goes away and leaves. Right? That's interesting, isn't it? That these people actually believe that for 3 days, the soul kept showing up, to see if it could come back into the body. And finally, after 3 days, it looks at the body and sees the early signs of decay and all that, and the face drained of blood, and says, nope, I'm out of here, okay? Because the soul could fly off to heaven. So 4 days in the grave then establishes that all was over. It's done. There's no doubt, there should not be any doubt here, that Lazarus indeed was dead. Now, what's interesting then about this is that Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, maybe a 30-minute walk. I've been doing some walking, a little bit of jogging, trying to get back in shape, trying to lose a little bit of weight. It's not easy to do, okay? I look at a donut and I gain half a pound. That's the way it goes. But walking, okay, so 1.5 miles, 1.75 miles. How long? You walk a nice pace, half an hour, give or take. You could be there. Now, Jesus, Yet Jesus waited for 2 days before he went there? Okay, so he's up to something. Now, it might look to someone who doesn't know any better as sort of calloused indifference. I'll get there when I can. It's not that important. And if it just works out the way it works out, then that's the way it... Now, Martha then, of course, as we said, says to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Okay, she's really, in a sense, accusing Jesus of a lot of things here, not the least of which is just sort of being calloused and indifferent. Lord, you could have, this wouldn't have happened if you'd have been here. If you just showed up. Okay? I'm sure glad we never say that to Jesus, aren't you? I'm sure glad we never have that kind of attitude. No, sometimes we like to tell Jesus how to do things. You ever do that? I found when I was younger, Lord, this is what I want to do. So if you just read it over quickly, don't have to read the fine print or anything, just look it over and just sign off at the bottom. Okay? I got this figured out. I know what's best for me. Okay? I know who I want to marry, and I did back in those days. Okay? And it wasn't who you think it was. Okay? But I was wrong. Okay? We like to tell Jesus how to do things. We assume that things like time, space, and proximity are necessary in order to get our desired results. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But of course, you were over there, and of course, we all know that if Jesus is 2 miles away, he can't do anything. Sometimes it's like Jesus is in heaven or he's in some distant place and he's not really connected with us. Why do we do that? Why do we intrinsically in our mind limit the power of God? Why do we assume that because Jesus, and this is a tough one, that because Jesus lets certain things happen that somehow he doesn't care? And we draw that conclusion sometimes. Lord, if you had really been... So our thoughts and our prayers are with Lisa Dodge this morning. Can we assume from the circumstances that she's going through that Jesus is indifferent? No, not at all. When Terry went through her defibrillator pacemaker being put in, and it went really well, and then later that next morning she was having some issues. Was Jesus not there? Did he not care? How many times do I just assume that because Jesus doesn't do what we think he should do, that somehow he doesn't care? Or that somehow I have the best battle strategy, I have the best plan for how my life should pan out? We do that. We do it all the time. Martha did it. Mary did it. Sometimes we like to tell Jesus how to do things. Now, it's okay to ask. There's nothing wrong with asking. And prayer does a lot of things, by the way. Prayer does change things. The Bible says that. Prayer changes things. Sometimes the outcome of certain situations can be the direct result of you and me praying about those things. But we have to realize that prayer has a lot of other benefits as well. Prayer changes you. One of the things that prayer will change if you pray is it'll change you. It'll change your perspective. It'll give you a sense of utter dependency upon God. I was just reading online the other day about the whole thing in Nice in France with this latest terrorist attack of this jihadist driving over a truck, killing 80-plus people. Okay? And someone said, well, our prayers, and someone else came in and says, well, that'd do a lot of good, wouldn't it? And it was just sort of like, prayer, what good is that? And sometimes we're tempted to feel that way. But the fact is, prayer it's the most powerful thing we can ever do. It is absolutely there are other things that God calls us to do as well, but absolutely, it is as powerful as anything. So sometimes we say that, and I have to catch myself because I say it sometimes. I find myself saying, well, if you're not able to get out and do this and this and this, you can at least pray. Now, that's a horrible way to put it. And I've done that. It's a horrible, it's like pray. That's what that should be the default response to anything. Even if we can get up and out and do stuff, we should pray about that. So sometimes we do like to tell Jesus how to do things. I know I do that. Okay? Concerning Lazarus' resurrection, Martha thinks only of the future, but Jesus is speaking about the present. John chapter 11, verses 23 to 25. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? So I ask myself, I ask you, do you believe that? Do you really, truly believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life? That it's not just for some, he's not just going to kind of fix all things at the end of time, so we think eschatologically, but he's with us now, and he will direct us. Now, the way that he does things are not always the way that we would do them. That's why he is Lord and we are not. If I'm going to follow him, then he is Lord. A couple scenes from a couple films that have been very powerful to me. I've seen the movie Rudy, even though I'm a Michigan fan, go blue, beat the Irish. But anyway, it's a good movie. And there's a scene, there's a character in the movie Rudy, and his name is Rudy, okay? And he wants to play football for Notre Dame. Now, he's a decent high school football player at best, okay? But he really wants, so he's got this passion, this desire to do this, but he doesn't have the ability, and so he begins to question God. Why did God plant in me the desire to play football at the college level for Notre Dame without giving me the ability? That seems almost unfair. Probably every one of us has been there at some point. And so he goes to the College of the Holy Cross, which is across the street from Notre Dame. He talks to the old priest, and the old priest says, son, I've been studying theology for 30 years, and there are two things that I'm sure of. One, there is a God, and number two, I'm not him. Okay? There is a God, and I'm not him. And there have been so many times in my life when it's like, Lord, this is really the way you should have done this. And God doesn't do it that way. And then a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. In January of 1978, my parents had bought an old farmhouse back in 1969. And nothing was square. It was a charming old house, but it was an old house. It dated before the Civil War. And so it was over 100 years old when they bought it back in 1969. And in 1978, it caught fire and burned down and was destroyed. Now, why? I asked that question so many times. I was living at home going to seminary at the time, so everything I had was gone as well, other than the clothes on my back. That's it. And my little briefcase with my stuff in the car. Okay? I had several hundred books. They were all destroyed, basically. So you ask the question, why? Why? Why did God do that? Well, years later, when my parents became, older and my mother became more infirm, they had a new house, or at least a newer house, that was a much safer house for them, and it didn't need nearly as much maintenance and upkeep. So what I saw there was, that's one thing I took away from that God gave them a newer place that would be easier to take care of. Now, that's one thing. There may have been more. I also like the scene from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where Mr. Tumnus is talking to little Lucy, and he says that Aslan is a lion, but he's not a tame lion. He doesn't do what you want. He doesn't just simply come at your behest. And the other line that he mentions about Aslan, that he's not safe. Do you know that following Jesus is not safe? You say, what do you mean? It's not safe. You might lose some stuff. You might have to go in a different direction. Your life might get called in a different way than what you expect, because following Jesus is not safe. I wanted to be a mathematician. I wanted to teach physics and mathematics because I loved it. I loved geometry. I loved algebra. I loved algebra 2. I loved algebra 2, not algebra also. Okay, algebra 2. Okay, and all that sort of stuff. I used to sit in study hall in high school making up trigonometry problems and solving them. I just loved to do that. I wanted to teach math. Okay, God said, nope. I get to play around with it. I still play around with math once in a while? Sure. Okay, good. Thank you. I know that sounds like utterly the most boring thing in the world to every one of you. And my wife said she was so glad she never met me in high school because it wouldn't have worked out. Okay. You and I have a thought about God that it's like, well, we can know what is best. And Jesus says, you trust me. You rely upon me. For Martha, the resurrection of the body is strictly a future event. For Jesus, the power of the resurrection is powerful now in his person. By knowing Jesus, we know the resurrection. Are we still going to physically die? Yes, if Jesus tarries, we are. But he is the resurrection. The resurrection is not just simply some event that's going to happen way down the road. We are partaking in the resurrection at this time. We are living the resurrection life. When I was at camp the last couple days, and I watched our kids and I watched many others, and I saw the power of the gospel just come across to them, and I saw the love that they had for each other, and I saw the worship time that they had on Friday night and on Saturday morning, and I saw the notion that, you know what, this is a powerful thing. And these kids just relating and connecting and crying over the fact that they're going to have to go home and not see each other anymore, and seeing the Lord working in their lives and the power of the gospel, and seeing them weep as their leaders prayed over them and encouraged them. It is a powerful thing. It was awesome to watch. The power of the resurrection is present now in the person of Jesus. He is with us and he is among us. Jesus himself is the resurrection and the life. If you want to know what life is all about, I can tell you one word. Jesus. That's what life is about. It's not about money. It's not about fame. It's not about me. It's not about gaining the upper hand. It's not about accomplishing more than somebody else. It's not about how many people answer to me. It's about Jesus Christ and following him and modeling him. The one who believes in him will live. You want to know what life really is? That's what life really is. The greatest life you can have is being a servant. Now, the world won't tell you that. They'll tell you the greatest life is being served. The greatest life is being a servant. And life is believing in him. Such life never experiences death. It might experience physical death, and it will eventually. But it never experiences ultimate death, because serving Jesus is everything. He is the resurrection and the life. Martha says to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who is to come into the world. In order to have freedom, in order to have life, we have to understand who Jesus is. First of all, right understanding of what Jesus will do is based on right understanding of who he is. And the Gospel of John, you read the opening chapters of the Gospel of John, and you see Jesus encounters his disciples. He calls Nathanael. And everybody there, they say, you are the Messiah, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. There's all these titles that are thrown out very early in the Gospel of John. So it's very clear who John is telling us that Jesus is. We need to know who Jesus is. That's what the Gospels are there for. They're there to tell us and explain to us who Jesus is. Right understanding of what Jesus will do is based on right understanding of who Jesus is. First of all, he is the Messiah. Now, the word Messiah is a Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is Mashiach. Okay? Greek word is Messias. It's also translated as Christos or Christ. The word Christ and the word Messiah mean exactly the same thing. They mean one who is chosen or one who is anointed. Jesus is the one who is anointed or chosen by God to do God's mission and plan. So when you and I say things to Jesus like, Lord, if you had been here, this would not have happened. Or when we say things to Jesus like, well, this is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to respond to life. This is what I think life is supposed to look like. That's not acknowledging that Jesus is the Messiah. That's not acknowledging that he is the anointed one. Lord, I want my life to go in this direction. That's not letting Jesus be Lord. He is the anointed one. He is the one chosen by God. And lastly, Jesus is the Son of God. He is the one whose very nature is divine. Remember that phrase doesn't imply, in this case, descent, that God is the Father and Jesus is the Son in terms of some sort of begetting, not begetting, but some sort of giving birth to. That the Son, Jesus, is of the same essence of the Father. He is God himself in human flesh. So Jesus is, by being the Son of God, he is of the same essence as his Father. He is divine. He is God's only Son. Now, if he is that, if he is God in human flesh, if he is one whose very nature is divine, then he can be trusted. He doesn't do anything evil because he can't. Remember in Titus chapter 1, verse 2, it says, God who cannot lie, promised before the world began. If Jesus Christ is the Son of God, he cannot lie. He cannot do anything destructive. He cannot do anything harmful. Everything he does, everything he says is for our benefit. We don't always understand that any more than we understood everything our parents tried to do. Right? Every mom here at some point has probably been accused of being the meanest mom in the world. Right? Why don't you let me do this? Okay? That's because your mom, you typically know better. You don't always know better. Most of the time you do. Right? God always knows better. Father knows best, right? Some of you watched that TV show growing up. Jesus knows best, okay? You'd never get that show on the air today. Father knows best? What are you talking about? Politically incorrect, you know? Sometimes it's true. But Jesus knows best. He is the one. He's the Son of God. Everything that he designs or intends for us is for our best, even if we don't think so. Jesus is the resurrection and the life. He doesn't just bring the resurrection. He doesn't just bring the life. He is the resurrection and the life. He always does things in his way, in his time, and in his manner. Let's remember as we live out our life in this coming week that we live and serve the one who self-professes as the resurrection and the life, the one for whom life is meaningful. If you want to know how to live a life that's meaningful and blessed and joyful, it's simply Jesus. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this magnificent truth. Pray that we would not